This is VOCM Open Line. Call 709-273-5211 or 1-888-590-8626. The views and opinions of this program are not necessarily those of this station. The biggest conversation in Newfoundland and Labrador starts now. Here's VOCM Open Line host Paddy Daly.
Well, all right, and good morning to you. Thank you very much for tuning into the program. It's Thursday, March the 14th. This is Open Line. I'm your host, Paddy Daly, and David Williams. He's produced the program. You'll be speaking with David when you pick up the phone to give us a shout in the queue and on the air. If you're in the St. John's metro region, the number to dial is 709-273-5211. Elsewhere, it's toll-free long distance, 1-888-590-VOCM, which is 8626. So yesterday morning we thought that Zach Dean was going to make his NHL debut last night for the St. Louis Blues against the Los Angeles Kings, but he did not draw into the lineup, so still waiting for Zach to hit the ice as an NHLer in the regular season, so hopefully that happens sooner than later. And I don't know if you watched the highlights this morning. So a former Toronto Maple Leaf, Ottawa Senator, Washington Capital, now Edmonton Oiler, Connor Brown. Former 20-goal scorer. So last night he scored his first goal of the season for Edmonton in his 55th game. He was 4 shots away from setting an NHL record for the most shots on goal without scoring, which is at 92 shots on goal. So he scores. It kind of just bounced in off his shin pad. It goes in the net. The crowd go absolutely wild. Edmonton's a great hockey city. The crowd go wild, and for the first goal of the season, they gave him a 2-minute standing ovation, which is kind of greasy, but it's kind of fun at the exact same time. So anyway, there you go. Quick one, just because I remember watching this performance, it was on this date in Munich, Germany in 1991 that Canadian figure skating great Kurt Browning won the World Championship. Okay, let's keep going. What do I got here? Oh, quickly, we talk about agriculture as we should. The number of farms in this province has been drastically reduced over the years, so it's the thought of, the offering of 64,000 additional hectares of land for agricultural purposes, and not a whole lot of headway has been made on that front. Then we talk about the potential for hydroponics and greenhouses to be peppered all across the province when we talk about proximity to food, the cost for transportation. We'll get into some cost of transportation here in a second as well, but we really need to put that back on the front burner. But it was on this date in 1794 that the cotton gin was finally patented, Eli Whitney. Now, of course, really up productivity in that sector and in manufacturing. It wasn't validated until 1807, and there's still some confusion as to whether or not he's the sole contributor to that eventual design for the mechanical cotton gin. So it was seen in Buddhist paintings back in medieval India as early as the 5th century, but on this date, the patent for Whitney's cotton gin was offered 1794. How about that? Okay, on that front. So the House of Assembly adjourned yesterday until Budget Day. The Premier's office says, well, the session was concluded quicker than expected, set for less than 2 weeks, and now gone away till next Wednesday, which is, of course, Budget Day. So, the gallery's been full. There was people there one day representing the folks at the tent encampment, what people refer to as Tent City. Fishery protesters have been in the gallery a couple of times. And when we talk about housing and healthcare and the fishery and cost of living related matters, apparently no more business to be attended to until after the budget. One area, and if we talk about agriculture, for instance, does the government take the issue of Crown land seriously? The private members' resolution tabled by Pleam and Forsey got some conversation and debate on the floor, but no action has been taken. There was some minimal proposals offered by the late Derek Bragg about some potential adjustments too, none of which went far enough. So says people who know much more about it, like Greg French, lawyer out in Clarendon, who is welcome to join us at any time. He's a wealth of information on the Crown lands related matters. But even things like that. So I know some of the housing and healthcare issues and fisheries related matters probably do require some additional time to see actual solutions come to reality, to manifest themselves, but even something like Crown lands. And then, we talked about the fact that there's been a stall in the psychiatric nurse pilot program, which is now apparently going to be a permanent feature, but it requires legislative change. It was paused back last year because there was not the legislation for bringing psychiatric nurses here to the province. So there's the College of Registered Nurses, there's the College of Licensed Practical Nurses, there's talk of them maybe amalgamating into one entity. And so Minister Osborne says that maybe legislation could be tabled in the fall sitting. Now, I know crafting and drafting legislation that works, that's meaningful, and has gone through the required due diligence certainly takes time. But when we figured out that there was a legislative hurdle to be cleared and such a critical role inside mental health and addiction services which could be filled by a psychiatric nurse, I wonder why that wasn't able to be tabled this go around. And again, I know it's not you just go to artificial intelligence and put in legislation for psychiatric nurses and something spits out that's real. And we can talk about artificial intelligence now near the end of the preamble as well. But there still seems to be work that could and should be done. Tony Wakem, of course, the leader of the official opposition, accuses the government of running from the questions. So if you want to take on anything, and I think that Crown Lands issue, it's about time the government gets off its stuff and figures this out. It's a huge concern. You might be unbeknownst to you that in the future, when you go to develop commercially or industrially and or residentially, you go to sell or develop, and next thing you know, you got a Crown Lands issue. So the quieting of titles and hiring a lawyer and the time and the aggravation and maybe the money you're going to have to pay to the government to acquire land that you may have been sitting on for decades, paying municipal taxes, and it's maybe not even yours. So there seems to me there could be a bit more work attended to. Okay, let's keep going. So, of course, the accusation of people in politics do things for political calculations in optics. Well, yes, that's not exactly a newsflash. Politics, in large part, is based on optics and political calculations of timing and presentation. So when Premier Fury becomes the 7th Premier in the country to write a letter to the Prime Minister asking for the pending increase in the carbon tax on April the 1st to be paused, of course, the accusations are quick and clear and concise, is that he's only doing it because he, one, asked the Prime Minister for permission, which seems a bit silly to me. Number two, that he's only doing it because of the optics. Okay, it's not the first time he did it. But it seems to me that there's a lot of people in the province who would like to see that pause. There may be some people who are in favour of a price on pollution and think that the carbon tax could work. At this moment, it's certainly not working the way it was intended to work. The current structure of it seems pretty flawed to me, but it's puzzling that the Prime Minister is seemingly obstinate on this file. You know, he said he's not here to make friends. He's here for generational change. Okay, in this province, there's not really a whole lot of alternatives that have not been explored, regarding the so-called transition and renewable energy and what have you. We're in a pretty good spot when we talk about renewable energy. Big programs to shift from heating your home with oil into central heat pumps and mini splits, and some of that has happened, and some people are transitioning the way they buy and operate their own vehicles. But the Prime Minister on this front, again, puzzling is the word that comes to mind. At one time, and this of course is strictly a political calculation, the Liberals have to maintain their stronghold in Atlantic Canada to have any hope of not being decimated in the upcoming federal election, whenever that may be. So carve out the carbon tax on home heating fuels or oils in this province and Atlantic Canada. They say it's nationwide, but of course, out in Western Canada, heating your home by oil is virtually untold. And pardon me, it's virtually non-existent. So that was a political calculation. There's maybe a win to be had here, and I don't care about political victories. I do know, and I hear from you all the time, about the pressures we're facing. And they are absolutely real. Now, of course, when the numbers are used like this, the April 1st increase is 23%. That's a lot. That's a lot. What it translates to, though, is going from 14 cents carbon tax on a litre of fuel to 17 cents. It's 14.3 to 17.6, which is not insignificant, but this is just a strange way for the country to be handling. Carve out the carbon tax on the dirtiest fuel to heat your home versus carve out the carbon tax on things like natural gas. And at this point, when 7 premiers and representing, whether it be the agenda-driven options by Alberta, Saskatchewan, and whether it be a different calculation here, the people of the province, the people of the country, could use a little break as we wait for inflation to stabilize, wait for some of the prices that have skyrocketed to come back to earth, for instance, including groceries, since 2020, an increase of 22.5%. So if you want to chime in on it, we can do it. And I asked a couple of questions yesterday that some people thought were unfair or unrealistic and have taken me to task. So be it, that's the nature of the beast. Please do if you see fit, whether it be via email or live on the air. Even if we talk about one political ideology or another, and for the Liberals it's the carbon tax, and for the Conservatives, for instance, it's axe the tax. Is there going to be any sort of policy that leads to reducing emissions? Whether or not you think that's important, it's going to be, once again, part of the political landscape and part of the debate. So, if there's going to be alternatives sought and found and invested in, for instance, the really go-to at this moment, and in this province there's $6 million been set aside for the next 3 years to investigate the potential for carbon capture in our offshore depleted oil wells. So if there's going to be things like that, that will be advanced and investments made. At some point, me and you pay the bill. So can we please get someone to put some numbers in front of us so that we can have a wholesome and fulsome conversation or debate about what's actually going on, how much things are going to cost, and why? Because at this moment, we're simply leaning on slogans. And I don't think, regardless of who you intend to vote for, slogans aren't going to pay the bills. They just aren't. Slogans aren't going to save me any money. Because at some point, let's just say, for instance, carbon capture becomes the next big thing. The money it's going to cost for it to be effective and efficient is going to be in the untold billions of dollars. Who's going to end up paying for that? In some form or fashion, we're going to foot some, or if not of all of that bill. So if you want to take it on, including the call for a pause on the pending hike on April the 1st, happy to have that conversation here today. And yes, is it done for optics? Most of the politics is for exactly that, right? And regarding the fisheries protest, welcome a conversation from whether it be on the processing side, and of course the frustration and anger that's mounting, and not just this year, but year over year on behalf of the harvesters. They, of course, have not only a problem with the price setting and what the price might be this year, for instance, with snow crab, but talking about expanding the processing sector, more licenses, and of course the long bandied about potential or the concept of outside buyers, whether or not that would really mean a huge bump in price for whatever species. Competition can indeed lead to that eventual outcome, but if you want to chime in on that, I think that's an important conversation. And sticking with the ocean for a second. So DFO has now told us that the capelin stock is now out of the critical zone. But there's a bit of a cautionary tale attached to it as well. So, for instance, when we know that DFO changed the process to assess northern cod stock in 2J3KL, they basically just they changed the model. So the old model used data beginning in 1983, but now they've gone all the way back to 1954, and consequently, it paints a rosier picture. The stock is out of the critical zone for the first time since 2016. Important to note, that doesn't mean that there's any more cod in the water, in the ocean. It just changed reference points. Same thing with the capelin stock. The new limit reference point has shifted from 640 kilotons to 155 kilotons. They also talk about the fact that they see fewer older fish in the capelin stock. What they see is fish that are maturing earlier in life, spawning earlier in life, and then when you spawn, you die. So it does say that, yes, out of the critical zone, but not necessarily as rosy a picture as just the headline portrays. And we all know that it's one of the linchpins as a forage fish in the ocean that has direct relationship with the strength of the cod stock and other species. But for now, looks like that is, I'll call good news, out of the critical zone. What do you think? You want to take it on? We can do it. And of course, just mention some of those transitions, oil to central heat pumps, electric furnaces and mini splits, what have you. It's a crying shame that when it became a popular option and there were support monies coming from the province and the federal government to do those types of things. And again, it's important for folks who are considering it that before you go too far down the road and you're curious and confused about the different pots of money and access and eligibility, let the retailer who does the selling and the installing of these units, let them do the legwork for you. They'll do it. Because if they do it for you and you're satisfied, then you're their customer. So do that. Make sure you call your insurance company to make sure that the move you're considering will see remained coverage in place or intact. So do those two things. But that HVAC story about all these customers who have paid for a service, including their 12-year warranty, they bought the product from Atlantic Standard HVAC, they're gone. So if you're one of those customers, give us a call, paint us a picture of exactly what happened. There's individual stories of someone who bought 2 mini splits and is being charged for 3, can't make any headway. So that's pathetic and ridiculous. It does come with long-lasting concerns regarding coverage of your 12-year warranty, is the number that was quoted in the news story. So that's dreadful. These companies that new Canadians would be potentially interested in expansion of that industry. And now that the pots of money have virtually dried up for most of them, as a matter of fact, now what was once a really big growing industry may have really stalled out, which means the stall out of a lot of jobs possibly. But if you're one of those customers of Atlantic Standard HVAC, I'm sure you're disgusted, and if you want to share your experience here on the show. Let's go. Okay. Just a couple of quickies before we get to you. How are we doing on the phone, David? Standard check-in with Mr. Williams. Can't see your fingers, but that's a thumb up. That's good news. All right. It might not be something that's front of mind for you today, but it's everywhere you look and everything you touch. Artificial intelligence. We've tried to broach it a few times because I do think it's worthy of plenty of conversation. Governments move very slowly. Now, people will be concerned with the ham-fisted approach to Online Harm Act and some of those related matters, and I'm happy to talk about that. But artificial intelligence can be very fun and can be very productive and can take away a lot of time and effort from some menial tasks. But it comes with significant risk, potentially, especially in the world of generative artificial intelligence. Lack of transparency, job losses due to automation, social manipulation, because the algorithms can be completely biased. Then you talk about social surveillance with the technology, lack of data privacy, the built-in bias once again, socioeconomic inequality, on it goes, weakening ethics and goodwill, the issues regarding investments, financial crises that have already come to pass regarding our AI algorithms. To move on it, the European Union has now adopted the Artificial Intelligence Act. Couple of the bullet points and takeaways. There's safeguards on general purpose artificial intelligence, limits on the use of biometric identification systems by law enforcement, bans on social scoring and AI use to manipulate or to exploit user vulnerabilities, rights of consumers to launch complaints and receive meaningful explanations, personal identification technologies in street surveillance cameras, and things like deepfakes, which are going to be unfortunately more common than not in the very near future. If there's something that's been manipulated and is a deep fake, it has to be acknowledged as such. And there's huge penalties for not adhering to this new Artificial Intelligence Act. Privacy commissioners in this country, including our very own Michael Harvey, are talking about generative AI and the risks associated with our own privacy. So the European Union has acted on it. It was voted through pretty much in favor. 523 votes in favor, 46 against, and 49 abstentions. So artificial intelligence has been addressed in a pretty comprehensive fashion in the European Union. Here, not so much. We're on Twitter or VOCM Openline. Follow us there. Email address is openline@vocm.com. When we come back, we're going to kick off the program speaking with the CEO of Municipalities Newfoundland and Labrador. That's Rob Nolan. They've got a new housing report out. We'll check in with Rob, and then we're talking to you about whatever's on your mind. Don't go away. Welcome back to the program. As mentioned, let's begin this morning on line number 2. Say good morning to the CEO at MNL. That's Rob Nolan. Good morning, Rob. You're on the air.
Good morning, Patty. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. How about you?
Good, thanks. Just calling in, as you mentioned, to talk about the housing and homelessness report that was released yesterday.
So let's just, from the top line, it's called Pull Together, Addressing Housing Insecurity in Newfoundland and Labrador. And it's prepared by Hope Jameson, which I think is important to mention because she's an extremely knowledgeable person on the housing issue, whether it be renting and affordable purchase. So put Hope's name out there. So it's done in conjunction or in partnership with Choices for Youth. Just basically, how and why was Choices for Youth the right partner to look at this issue?
Absolutely, and I agree. Hope is probably the foremost expert in housing in the province, so we were really fortunate to have them on board. Choices has been a partner in this conversation with us for the last few years. In 2020, we did a municipal census of our members, and we included a series of questions about housing and homelessness in communities, and that was really the start of the conversation with Choices around housing and homelessness in the province. At the time, there was kind of a low level of recognition of housing issues and homelessness, which I think we saw right across the country. And then over the last few years, there's been a growing interest and a deepening of understanding across communities, across municipalities in the province, and of course across the country in relation to housing and homelessness. Choices for Youth has been a great partner of ours over the years, and this falls right into their bailiwick. So we really looked at, of course, through the municipal lens, what can municipalities do in terms of housing and homelessness? What do municipalities need to respond to housing shortages and growing homelessness? And then Choices, of course, comes in through the social sector lens. So they really look at what wraparound supports are needed to ensure that people have stable and affordable and accessible housing, and what's needed across the province. And it feeds into the work of both of our organizations, and I think both organizations complement each other well in the conversation.
There is a distinct difference in housing concerns, rental or otherwise, when we talk about large urban centres versus parts of rural Newfoundland and Labrador and rural Canada. So when we look at rural, I think reading the summary that you point to, I believe the phrase was, it is uniquely challenged. How so? Give folks some specifics to consider, because I don't think housing is a one-size-fits-all conversation.
No, absolutely. And that was a key reason for doing this report, Patty. There's a good understanding, or a fair understanding, we'll say, of urban housing and homelessness challenges in the province. Of course, St. John's often is viewed as the only community that has housing and homelessness issues, which is certainly not the case, and that's shown through this report. And across the country, there's a better understanding of urban housing and homelessness, and often homelessness in particular is viewed as a challenge that's faced by large urban centers and not rural communities. Coming into this and, through the pandemic, as this conversation grew, we recognized that there wasn't a good understanding. So that would be the first unique challenge for rural communities, just a base level understanding of housing and homelessness challenges in rural communities across the province, and that preconception of it being an urban issue, it being a St. John's issue. What Choices has found over the years, and what this report backs, is the fact that what we have happen is many of our communities across the province don't have accessible housing, don't have the supports necessary for individuals who are insecure or experiencing housing insecurity, and they often have moved into St. John's to find the supports that they need. So our communities across the province, our rural communities, are losing residents into the urban centre. And that's the same story across the country. But this report really showed that when Hope, doing their research, spoke with service providers as well as those who are housing insecure, and looked at 11 communities across the province. And just to point to one stat that really brings it to the forefront, of course, the accepted definition of affordable housing is if you are spending less than 30% of your gross income on housing. And the report found that about 1/3 of renter households in 8 of the 11 communities studied live in unaffordable housing. So 1/3 of renter households live in unaffordable housing. And in some cases, that's as much as 44% of the households in those communities. And that's all rural communities that we were looking at of those 11.
Therein lies, I think, the key challenge. It's one thing to build, it's another to build affordably. So when we've got some of the provincial programs that are talking about the private sector building, but the rents being set by NLHC, I don't know how attractive that might be on the private developer side, right? Because the cost to build per square foot is higher than it's ever been. When they build homes, they're not in it simply for fun and to put roof over people's head. They're also in it to make money, because there's a lot of risk assumed with developing, regardless if we're talking commercial or even on the residential side. So how do you actually hit the 30% target of annual income to be spent on housing? Because you can build it, but that might not change the water on those beans.
And when we're talking about housing and homelessness, we're talking about right across the housing spectrum, as you've noted. So, housing stock is a big piece of that, and housing supply across the province. We hear a lot about short-term rentals, and that's certainly talked about in the report, but I wouldn't focus on that other than the fact that we have housing supply problems, we have housing stock problems, and NLHC is a piece of the solution. So one thing that we heard from this report from our communities, and we hear from our municipalities all the time, is that there is NLHC stock, NLHC units in communities that are inaccessible at the moment because they need to be retrofitted or renovated to get up to standard. So that's a key piece of the puzzle, and that needs partnership across all orders of government. The supply and stock is also a piece of the puzzle to ensure that there's not just enough housing, but that we have that affordable housing. So the affordable housing in the definition of social housing from NLHC, but also just having enough supply in our communities that renters are able to find housing that they can afford. In the conversation, a challenge is also access to land for our municipalities. So just simply access to land for development in our municipalities, access to crown lands in municipal boundaries, and there's confusion around what crown lands owns and what they don't, as well as, of course, you've heard a lot about over the last couple of years the difficulties of title in terms of land, and that gets difficult for developers. So you mentioned private side of the coin. That's very important for housing stock and supply. But in terms of through the municipal lens, we need help to access the lands, to get funding as well for infrastructure. FCM came out with a report a couple months ago saying that each new unit across Canada requires an average of $107,000 of infrastructure, and we anticipate that is actually a higher number for Newfoundland and Labrador due to aging infrastructure and just due to the state of affairs in rural Newfoundland and Labrador.
What are we seeing with seniors in rural Newfoundland? Because when you're on a fixed income and don't own your own home, even things like heating your home become a massive issue. So again, when we talk about housing, people simply think about whether or not you're renting a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment or you own your own single family dwelling. But it's all the cost of operating, including heating. What are we finding in this report regarding seniors who don't own their own home?
Yeah, so I would say that seniors who do own their own home across the province are also facing challenges just in terms of being overhoused. So you have many seniors across the province who, have become empty nesters, have become single-person dwellings, and don't have a house within their community to go to downsize. So that's a real challenge even for seniors who own their own homes in the province, that the next chapter's home is not available in their community, and then they're looking at leaving their community. But you're right, anyone on fixed income, particularly seniors on fixed income in retirement, are facing rental rates that have increased by 15% since 2021. Interest rates have climbed by 4.5% in the past year. And as you mentioned, home energy costs have increased by 22% overall between August 2022 and August 2023, as it shows in the report. So costs are really skyrocketing for everyone. But you're absolutely right. People on fixed income, which is many seniors across the province, don't have options to go to. We know that in small rural communities, retirement homes are hard to find. Smaller homes for people who can take care of themselves but don't want to live in the larger houses that they raise their families in aren't there. But also seniors who are renting are facing increased rent, increased heating costs, and increased costs across the board. Yeah,
multi-generational housing is coming back. It used to be a thing, and then it went away, and now it's very real once again. And this is not a direct relation comment here, but pre-pandemic, there were no families in shelters. Now there's 16. That just jumped off the page when I looked at the summary, which goes to show you that homelessness is not just at Tent City. Homelessness can be people who are living in very precarious positions, who are a couch away from not having a place to stay. So just add that to the mix. Very quickly, with the focus on rural, we had conversation in the past, it was either myself and you or myself and Amy Cody, about the fact that many municipalities would love nothing more than to provide some affordable housing units for their residents. Now, unfortunately, like at Bay Roberts, there's now all of a sudden a new stigma associated with low-income or affordable housing. But the horsepower, the manpower, or the human resources to get all the data together, to file applications for access to funds inside the $4 billion Housing Accelerator Fund federally, that was a problem. Are we seeing any continued cooperation or enhanced cooperation so that regions can be dealt with in that type of fashion versus communities left on their own? Because for some of these communities, they just don't have someone or the wherewithal or the resources to even fill out the application.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Patty. That's a key challenge that we're advocating on. Regional cooperation being allowed in those areas. So HAF is a good example, Housing Acceleration Fund. They allowed regional cooperation for applications in jurisdictions that had regional government. We don't have regional government. And we actually asked the question of CMHC, if it's a de facto or an ad hoc collaboration between neighboring communities, can they put in an application? And the answer was no. So we're working. We've sent correspondence, and we've been speaking with Minister Fraser, the Federal Minister of Infrastructure and Communities and Housing, around that conversation. How do our municipalities, in our context, we have, and you hear us talk about this all the time, we have 75% of our municipalities have under 1,000 people. Most of those municipalities have one or fewer full-time equivalent staff. So you have a town clerk in a town office who's working 2 afternoons a week and has to not only find the programming available from the province and the feds, but access that through providing a good application. So cooperation regionally is necessary in that, but it's also necessary for the province and the federal government to design programming that meets our communities where they are. And that's a key piece of the advocacy that we're doing and in conversation with the federal government and provincial government.
I appreciate the time, Rob. Anything else before we say goodbye?
No, thank you very much for having me.
Nice to have you on. Stay in touch. Okay, bye-bye. There's Rob Nolan, the CEO at MNL. And very quickly, he mentioned that they've adjourned the sitting of the House of Assembly. Apparently, all matters had been addressed. So in the fall sitting last year, they did indeed overhaul the Municipalities Act. It's now called the Towns and Local Service Districts Act. Seems to be a pretty solid piece of legislation. The reaction has been pretty positive. We are waiting for an overhaul of the St. John's Act, because, we are not governed by that Towns and Local Service Districts Act. We have our own standalone City of St. John's Act. The Mayor and others have been calling for meaningful change and an overhaul process to that. Maybe that might have been attended to in the spring sitting. Apparently not. Let's take a break. When we come back, we've had some conversations on the show about the fact that some critical minerals, based on subdued Chinese demand and some other forces, some of these prices for critical minerals have fallen through the floor. Minister Parsons here says that we are still well positioned, and we are. Investment will be gauged on the price of some of these minerals. The federal minister, Jonathan Wilkinson, much more concerned. Peter Dimmel, we believe, was at the Prospectors Convention in Toronto a little while back. He's a prospecting geologist. Peter Dimmel, right after this. Don't go away. Welcome back to the program. Let's go to line number 3 and say good morning to prospecting geologist Peter Dimmel. And good morning, Peter. You're on the air.
Good morning, Patty.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So I assume you were at the PDAC conference, were you, Peter?
Yes, I was. Yeah, probably I've been going since the 70s, so I've been there quite a while.
Well, I'm glad you've been there since the 70s, because it'll be interesting to hear the contrast between conversations over the course of time. The country's been really quite bullish on the fact that we've got so many of the critical minerals that are in high demand, or were anyway, just for context so people know what we're talking about regarding price. In 2023, the price of lithium fell 82.3%, nickel down almost 30%, cobalt about 38.5%, manganese 22.3%. How did that fuel the conversation at the most recent PDAC conference?
Well, the major, what we have is we have a situation where we have 27,000 people attended that convention this year from 130 countries. And in the Investors Exchange, which is where the junior companies that are doing most of the exploration in the world, not the majority, but certainly many more than what we've had in the past, we're promoting lithium, for example. You mentioned lithium prices having dropped. We say dropped, but they're still 2 or 3 times higher than historical costs. They did go very high, and then they dropped down. But as I say, some of the discussions were about that. Why did they come down? Well, it's because, again, demand goes and thing. A lot of the people that are looking for lithium right now will not come on stream for 2 or 3 or 4 years. It obviously makes it much more difficult to raise money because the price drops. But like I say, looking at it historically, they're not that bad. It's the same with all these other type of minerals. Nickel down, yes, but historically it's still not bad. Copper, the same. And the demand is going to be there. It just isn't there right now because people are just ramping up for it.
Peter, when I read some different analysts chiming in on this concept, they're talking about things like the simple reason that prices decline, but they say matching demand with supply, if we talk ton for ton, is not so easy. Can you help elaborate on that?
Well, and that's the problem, isn't it? Because you cannot ramp up that quickly. And when people see ramping up going on, they get concerned. They say, okay, that demand, the supply is going to outstrip the demand. But usually it doesn't. It usually matches up over time. But it's interesting in our business. We are price takers, no matter what it is. In the mineral mining industry, we do not set price. The price is set for us, and we have to work within those constraints. And typically with these things, as I say, the price is driven by macroeconomics and somebody making a decision somewhere says, I'm going to increase demand. But they can't increase demand immediately, or increase supply, I should say. And they can't do it immediately. Copper is a good example. We've been talking about for the last number of years that copper is going to go higher. But what happens is somebody increases it, increases their supply, and everybody else says, it's not going to get to that. So copper is still historically at a high level. It's just not as high as it was a little while ago. People are still making money producing copper.
It's a pretty broad economic hangover, as I saw one person refer to it. And, what was the conversation like regarding the near-term future? Because, price of all things like minerals can be quite volatile when we talk about the possible surplus inside the product itself. But what does the forecast sound like on the floor of the convention for the next couple of years? Because are they talking about downward pressure on prices for years to come? Because that will have a direct relationship with capital investment in the country. So what was the forecast sounding like?
No, the forecast, the big problem we have right now is a short-term funding thing. The companies that explore for these minerals, metals, etc., are having a heck of a time trying to raise money. There's for some reason the interest in the mineral exploration, especially the junior sector, has fallen off. We depend upon people raising money for us so that we can put that money into exploration. So we have things like flow-through, which allows the investor to get the tax break. But even that is not in favor as much as other things. I mean, we're competing with the virtual currencies. We're competing with technology companies. We're competing with all of these things. The overall way people are looking at future for most minerals is that the price will go up. But the thing is, it's just not right now. So it's funny how people look at things. Well, okay, it's not going up right now, so therefore we won't explore right now. Then they raise money when the price is up. The price drops down, and then they have that same problem again. So it's sort of a catch-22 situation. You can explore much easier when the price is down, but that's when you can't raise the money.
And we're also, those levels of competition that you mentioned, add to it, we're competing with other countries. I mean, just look at the United States and the billions, if not trillions of dollars that are going to be part of the Inflation Reduction Act. Our country has indeed tried to replicate that on scale with, trying to provide clean tech, manufacturing, tax subsidies and credits and what have you. So when that comes to that level of investment, the thought was that we have so many of these minerals and maybe we could do a better job of not just exploring and producing, but we could expand into the secondary and tertiary processing because in large part, we've produced the material, we've sent it somewhere else and then we bought the finished product back. So what did the capital investment in either expanding or opening new mines sound like, whether it be in Northern Ontario or Labrador?
Well, I think that's still going to happen. One example we've got is of interest in critical minerals, for example, lithium, for example, here in Newfoundland. A couple of years ago, the first sort of main discovery of lithium was made in Newfoundland by two junior companies. That has now been optioned to a company called Piedmont Lithium, who is working out of the Carolinas. And they have a mine in Quebec right now that is operating, but they're going to work on this one in Newfoundland, this deposit area. Now, we haven't defined resources yet, but they're working towards that. So these mines are still going into production because the demand is going to be there. You would not have a cell phone, for example, without lithium. I mean, most people don't realize the value of mining overall and how it affects everyday life. And I think until the government realizes it, and we in the mining industry realize it, but the average person doesn't. So I think there's a lack of interest in investing in us and working with us to try and make these mines happen.
I wonder if some of that could be adhered to. Now, I'm not promoting isolationist policies or protectionism, but for instance, like in nickel, if Indonesia produces almost 50% of the world's nickel, but still you can use tax credits in the United States and in this country, say for instance in the automobile industry, you can use Indonesian nickel and still get those tax credits, versus if there was some protectionism associated with product produced here would be the only ones available for those tax credits. I don't know if that's unfair business practice, but some adherence to it could certainly be a boost for the industry.
Well, I'm sure that certainly would help, but I'm not sure in a world situation. We are a global industry. Mineral exploration and mining is global. That's why there were 130 countries represented at the PDAC this year, and just about every year. I talked to people, two geologists I met from Australia that were here promoting their property. Now, that was a gold property, but the point of it is they come here because most of the money that's raised for mineral exploration is raised on the Toronto Stock Exchange, or 30% worldwide. So it's the largest single source area for raising money for exploration and mining. The people realize that we need these things, and they're coming here to try and raise the money to do it. But I'm not sure, given globalization, I'm not sure that sort of isolationism would necessarily help. I think we do need to work towards that. I think we need to have our own supplies, because we have the problem right now with China controlling most of the rare earths, controlling a lot of the lithium and things. We need to be able to say we have a source in Canada, and same for the U.S., that we can rely on, that is not going to be subject to any sort of blockade or anything like that.
Yeah, maybe it was a poorly couched question. I'm not suggesting zero subsidy for Indonesian nickel, but maybe not quite as lucrative or as an attractive a subsidy for Indonesian nickel versus Canadian nickel. Maybe that's what I'm trying to get at. Maybe a floating scale that might be beneficial to Canadians, as opposed to just saying you cannot use this from that country. And of course, then it's the cost of production. It can be quite expensive to open a mine, expand a mine, whether it be with human resources and otherwise, permitting and all the rest of it, versus countries like Indonesia, which can probably do it at a lower cost. But you're the expert on this particular front, Peter. What's some of your final thoughts you'd like to leave the listeners with?
Well, I think the mining industry has a good future. It always will, because we always need metals, minerals, things like lithium. If we want to have cell phones, if we want to have cars, if we want to have everything. People forget that. They jump in their car, I don't like mining, I don't want it anywhere near me, but they jump in their car and they drive wherever they're going. If it wasn't for mines, we wouldn't have those things. So we have to work, we have to get support, we have to do all those things. And just one thing, if there's a little more interest from your people, especially in central Newfoundland, there is a Central Minex thing coming up the 23rd to the 25th in Gander, and there will be an introductory prospecting course given at that through the Newfoundland and Labrador Prospectors Association. So if there's any interest in that, please get on the NLPA website and have a look at it. Find out what we do, find out if you're interested in it, and learn more about the industry.
It's a fascinating industry that I try to follow along as best I can as a lay person. Peter, great to have you on the show. We appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter. Bye-bye. Peter Dimmel, prospecting geologist, trying to fill in some of the blanks that we've been putting out there regarding the PDAC convention and the slump in the prices and the forecasted future and what it means for this province. We really do have massive opportunity in the mining sector here. And of course, everything comes at an associated cost, whether we talk about financially or environmentally. But let's take a break. When we come back, Gerald, you're next to talk about school buses. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 1. Gerald, you're on the air.
Good morning.
Morning to you.
Yeah, I'm a school bus driver. I've been driving buses for 45 years. But the school board, I got a problem with it. They don't give us any rights as a driver. I'll give you an example. If there's a stop sign, if they made a stop sign, they made it on their computer. It's not safe. If I make it safe, if they catch me, they suspend me for 2 weeks.
For doing what, sir? I'm sorry, Gerald. What about a stop sign?
We get a list of stop for the school bus.
Oh, yes, okay.
And if I stop because of safety somewhere else, they'll suspend me right away for 2 weeks. They shoot and ask question after. I got a problem with that. We lose 2 weeks' pay. I got an example in Mount Pearl. I drive Mount Pearl.
Okay.
And last weekend we had a big snowstorm. I let go of maybe 8 or 9 children. 4 of them got to walk alongside a road full of snow and snowbank for a good ways. And I can't stop in their house to let them off at safety, because if I get caught, I was doing it last year, and I was warned if I get caught, I get suspended. You know, as a bus driver, I should have the rights to tell the school board that, you know, where is safe and where is not safe. I mean, I'm on the same run for 8 years. I know where it's safe and where it's not safe. If I'm not by now, I'm stupid. And it pissed me off. Another thing, just say for argument's sake, I stop and I got my sign out and everything, a car passed with the lights on. So I think it's plate number. I go to court. You know what they say to me in court?
What?
Do you recognize the driver? Now, how are you going to recognize the driver at 50 clicks? And I said, no. They throw me out of court right there. You know, we got no rights. It's time somebody opened their eyes for us.
It's a strange set of circumstances, because your number one job is to get the children from the bus stop to the school, and from the school back to be dropped off as safe as possible. And so if you're trying to avoid a child having to walk an extended amount of time and distance up against snowbanks, nowhere to walk safely, and you try to do something to protect that child, you're going to lose a couple of weeks' pay. It just, on its face doesn't sound like it makes a whole lot of sense. So who do you answer to? Who tells you these types of things?
That's right. It don't make sense. And, I'm the one that can lose 2 weeks' pay. And we, as bus driver, anybody that work to pay bill. We don't work just for the fun of it. And say if that child was struck after you get off the bus and you walk alongside the bank, I got to live with in my conscience.
Right.
That child got hurt or got dead. I got to live with that.
Gerald,
I don't agree.
I think this all sounds really quite bizarre. So is there a possibility, as a school bus driver, on the day of the big snowstorm or the day after when the schools reopen, are you able to go directly to a supervisor and say, here's my thoughts. I am familiar with this stretch of street in Mount Pearl. It's going to be really unsafe today. I'm going to drop the kids XYZ down the road. Are you allowed to do it, on an ad hoc basis, day to day, based on the weather conditions? Ask for permission before you get in trouble?
No.
No.
No. Just stop it there. That's why we got to stop. If the child gets run over, that's not our problem. It's only a life. You carry 40 lives beyond you every day. And small children from kindergarten to grade, 8 or 9, 12, whatever. It makes you think, I mean, you're not hauling a load of lumber. And people don't think of that. They think, he said behind the wheel, he don't know it. Bullshit. We sit behind the wheel, and we care for every life that we got behind us.
Well, you could only hope. That's exactly the mindset of every school bus driver. It's a pretty precious load that you're carrying around, and certainly parents of children who are on these buses want their bus driver to be as focused on their safety than as much as anything else, or if not more than anything else. Gerald, I appreciate the time. I didn't know this was the case. This is sort of bizarre, feels very heavy-handed. If a bus driver, through good conscience, would like to make good, safe decisions on behalf of the children under his responsibility, you think that would be applauded, not punished?
They should ask us why we done it. Not turn around and say, suspend you 2 weeks, I'll decide, okay, go back on the road. I lost 2 weeks' pay. That could be my life bill, that could be my whatever.
Well, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. Understand your concern in full. And, like most things, we try to add to our list when we get a chance to speak to the decision makers, those in authority. This is now on my education list because it just really doesn't make any sense. It's much akin to the 1.6 kilometre rule, which was just plucked out of midair, had no real teeth. That's thankfully gone by the wayside. And, the courtesy seat issue hopefully has been addressed a little bit more smartly. And I'll add this to my list because what you're telling me is the antithesis of safe procedures. I appreciate the call, Gerald. Thanks for doing it.
Thank you very much.
All the best. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I mean, seriously? A bus driver tries to do what they can, he or she, to make sure your kid gets home safe, and that could be punishable by 2-week suspension? Sometimes you just got to scratch your head, right? Where does this stuff come from? Is it because there's been examples in the past where altering the route and not stopping at the approved bus stops has been a problem? Like, is there something that has led to this type of policy? I have no idea, but we'll try to figure it out. Let's see. Let's take a break for the news. When we come back, the ongoing concerns being brought forward by the fish harvesters are getting louder, and they are frustrated. They want to see monumental sea change. John is in the queue. He's next. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 2. Good morning, John Effort. You're on the air.
Good morning, Patty. How are you?
Doing well this morning. How about you?
I'm doing very well, very well. I want to start off, I'm going to apologize if there was a disruption of work for anybody that's working at a certain provincial building this morning. Sorry. Enjoy your holiday. Anyway, we'll get to the root of the issue pretty quick. The root of the problem here pretty quick.
Before we get to that, though, John, so are you saying that the protest at the Petton Building on Strawberry Marsh Road, that's where the fisheries office is, so the protesters, they blocked off the doors and no one was allowed in?
Yeah. I wouldn't say that we blocked the doors, but I guess the presence of such a large group here deterred people from coming to work this morning.
So nobody entered the building? They're all off for the day?
Seems to be, yep. They're all off for today. Yep.
Okay.
Second day in a row.
So
and we're basically I wouldn't say we're targeting buildings. Like we're trying to get some attention from the government, and obviously we're getting attention from the government because they decided to close the house early yesterday.
Yeah, with an awful lot of stuff left to be figured out because, for instance, snow crab is right around the corner. So the structural changes you're asking for, I'm not going to ask you to speak for Bruce Short, but he's a harvester from Green Bay. But he's talking about the want to be on the water when they want and have access to all species of fish. And again, not asking you to speak for Mr. Short, but does going on the water when you want mean fishing out of normal seasons? Because there's concern with water temperature and spawning.
No, are you saying fishing outside of normal seasons?
Yeah, like, is that what he's getting to there?
No. This has nothing to do with fishing outside of normal seasons. We're not looking to change the seasons. We're just looking to get fishing when our season dates are open and take advantage of the weather within the season and go and plan and fish when we feel it's best for our businesses and most suitable for safety.
So we're talking about doing away with daily limits as put forward by the processors, basically.
The processor should have nothing to do with daily limits or weekly limits or how much you can bring in a week, a day, or when you can fish or when you can't fish. But look, over the years, there's times, yes, that a company may get blocked up, and I'll get a phone call. Look, John, can you hang on for a day? We're really blocked up. Yeah, no problem. I'll help you out. But when it comes to the point that you're tied on for weeks on end, and waiting to get out while the season is ticking by, and it's going to affect your other fisheries that you do after the crab. This is not just about crab.
Right.
This is about all fisheries. Now, I had an agenda this morning, but the first thing, and we kind of got off topic, but we can get back to that in a second. But the first thing that I want to talk about is the fear-mongering that the provincial government started yesterday by saying that if the fishermen get what they want, it's going to put 6,500 plant workers out of work. That's totally wrong. Listen, plant workers are our friends. Plant workers are our families. Plant workers are our next-door neighbors. We are not looking to put any plant workers out of work. That is totally ridiculous. If anything, what we're trying to do is going to create more work. It's going to create competition. It's going to create more money to the rural communities. That's all this is going to do. And the statement that the fear-mongering that the provincial government put out there yesterday that to protect, as far as I'm concerned, the statement was made not to protect plant workers. It was made to protect the big companies, the cartel that is in Newfoundland right now.
I'd like to ask a question about that. Let's just say this. I think they're talking about the prospect or the possibility for outside buyers. So if that happens, and an outside buyer comes from, let's just say, the United States, they buy your catch and they ship it out in whole form, would that not jeopardize some potential jobs and weeks of employment at some local processing plants if the product never makes it inside their doors but is shipped out in whole form?
Totally no. Definitely not. And I'll tell you why. Okay. Right now, we have a major issue with capacity here in Newfoundland. The 5 to 6 big companies here in Newfoundland that own the processing sector and totally control the Newfoundland fishery have done this, and because they've shrunk the workforce, shrunk the number of plants that are around. I'll go back to 2005. There were 14,000 plant workers. Today they're estimating 6,500, and there were 32 crab processors, 32 crab processing plants. The companies, the cartel has shrunk, bought up, closed down plants in various communities. That's what affected the plant workers, the amount of plant workers that are in Newfoundland. Now, because of the capacity issue that we have here now, and right now, because of the capacity issue, every fishery that is being persecuted is affecting the next one because they can't handle it. Right now, if you're a crab fisherman, okay, if you're fishing crab, you have a processor in your schedule. But during the crab season, there's also other fisheries that start. And because the crab season is going on now, and the undercapacity within the province of Newfoundland, they can't handle the other fisheries. So if there was more capacity here, these other fisheries would be able to be persecuted. We've ended up losing fisheries because of the capacity here now. Now, if we ship, for an example, 2 to 3 million pounds of crab off the island, that's going to free up room for more processing of other fisheries.
So, does that mean that there's been species and seasons where the total allowable catch was not taken out of the water because of restrictions of capacity in the processing sector?
Definitely.
Can you give me an example of that? Because I know last year, and I know this is more than snow crab, and there was concerns last year that with the 6-week tie-up, people were having a hard time selling their cod, for instance, and they were told, no, can't accept it this year. So, and I don't know what the percentage of the tacking crab was taken last year, but it was well over 90. So can you give me an example of when there's been seasons or species where we left product in the water simply because of restricted capacity?
Yep. Caitlin.
Okay.
Caitlin. Right there. Turbot. 2 examples right off the top of my head.
Fair enough. And on a side note, I guess it's encouraging news that DFO is taking capelin out of the critical zone. There's a bit more of a cautionary tale attached to it. So, okay, when the Premier says they're looking at the potential for outside buyers, they're looking at processing capacity, but also they're talking about looking at controlling agreements. Now, we had Jimmy Lee Foss on the show last week, and that's a very clear example of how that's detrimental to an enterprise. But with the controlling agreements that have already been settled in the court of law, how is it even still ongoing? Because when things are settled in court, you would think that gives a broad understanding of how it's not allowed, and consequently it still continues. Can you give us some understanding of how it's not being enforced? Because when the court ruling was very, very, very clear on this front, yet it continues, I don't understand how.
Okay, well, that's an easy one. And basically, look, when you have the resources that some of these guys, the companies have, with lawyers and everything like that, basically they're just jumping from loophole to loophole. They close one loophole, they find another one, and this is how they're doing it.
Amazing stuff. It's such a confusing industry. I mean, it's every single year, certainly since I've been in the media, that the issues, they don't change. just the calendar year changes, and we don't seem to be making a whole lot of headway. So on top of these things, like for instance, I'll get your position on this because you're the professional here. Even inside the Fisheries Act, if Ottawa and the province wanted to clean up some of the ongoing issues, even if we just said things like adjacency is the guiding principle, and we deal with the nonsense regarding buddy up, and we deal with the foolishness regarding bycatch, a lot of the other problems kind of solve themselves. Does that make any sense, John?
Yes, it does. Yeah, definitely makes sense.
It's such a confusing industry. I know there's nothing simple in this world, and the relationship between the processors and the harvesters has long been contentious, maybe more so than ever before, or certainly in recent memory. Let me ask you this one. What do you think of this? So let's just paint the hypothetical. Outside buyers around the wharf, wherever you land your product. I suppose you land at Portagrave, do you, John?
That's my main port, but I mean, I've landed in several different ports throughout the season, depending on where I'm fishing.
And I hate to just pick snow crab all the time, but let's say, and the dock price currently in Nova Scotia $2.50. If there was outside buyers that were also simply offering the $2.50, do you think because of the fractured relationship and the distrust that maybe the harvesters would be quick and want to sell to an outside buyer at the exact same price just because they have a bitter relationship with the local processor? Do you think that's a possibility?
Look, not so.
Okay.
The processors here are running a very good business. They're taking advantage of her, and I mean, they're doing great. They're doing great for themselves. Is it helping us? Not at all. It's really hurting us. Again, at the end of the day, look, we need all our processors. We need more processors here in Newfoundland, but we need free market, free enterprise, and I mean, it's as simple as that. And if the offer is $2.50 here, if you're going to bargain with a company and make a deal with a company, and they're off the island for $2.50, and there's a processor here willing to give you $2.50, treat you fairly, you're going to stay here, aren't you?
I would think so. I was just painting a picture just to get a reaction from someone who actually is in the industry.
Yep. No, look. There's no ill will. We know that you're running your business perfectly. But now the way that you're running your business perfectly and taking advantage of government policies and government legislation and colluding together. Now this is what's causing the problem. You're doing everything right now. They're doing everything that's legal to them to run their business the best possible way. And their best possible way right now is to completely take over the fishery in Newfoundland. And if they completely take over, which they're very close to doing, I got 30 years at this now. This is the worst I've ever seen it, and I don't see it getting any better. It's impossible to get better. To the point where people are saying, years ago, 10 years ago, I would probably say, probably 20, 30 years down the road, you'll see companies owning all the fish in Newfoundland that the independent fish harvesters own now, and they'll have it on factory freezers. Where we are now, I'm seeing that within a year to 2 years. It's scary.
Now, some of these structural changes, they're not going to happen before the pending species seasons this year. They just simply can't. When we talk about expanding processing capacity, that takes time for applications, approval, construction, or to renovate one plant or another. We talk about outside buyers. That's not going to happen this season either. All of those things said, do you think we're going to see an uninterrupted beginning to the seasons? Because these structural changes will take time. Maybe commitments can be made, which gives maybe harvesters cold comfort. But if they're not made this year, do you still think that harvesters will be not tying up boats and trying to prosecute the fisheries on time as per so-called normal?
Oh, Paddy, you're wrong. This can be changed this year. It has to be changed this year for the season.
Well, how can you possibly expand the processing sector?
Easy right now. We're not only looking for more processing licenses here to somebody who's actually going to open a plant. We're also looking for the caps that are on the plants here now. There's a plant in St. Mary's now that has a cap on it that they can only process. I believe it's 1 to 2 million pounds. Let's say it's 2 million pounds. Why can't they have their cap lifted? They have the facility. They have the workers. Right now, that will help. That will be a big help. That could free up a lot of space.
And, of course, they overcame that last year. The cap, they blew right through it. I think they brought in an additional £4 million, if I remember correctly.
Exactly. They were just taking overflow. And here's the sad part about it. They have a cap that they can't go get new fishermen. But when a plant gets blocked up, another plant gets blocked up, they can send their product down there to the plant and blow the cap open. So basically, again, controlling the fishermen. So this plan can actively go out and bargain with fishermen to attract more fishermen.
And then trucking product around unnecessarily, so it just all makes very little to no sense. John, good to have you on the program. Stay in touch.
Patty, I got one more thing I wanted to speak on. It'll only take me a second. I wanted to speak on the minister's comment yesterday about free enterprise, and that the minister and the premier will decide whether or not the fishermen in Newfoundland get free enterprise. It's the most ridiculous, unconstitutional statement I've ever heard. It makes no sense. We live in Canada. We live in a free country. We do not live in a state-run country. The government does not control free enterprise. Thank you, Patty.
Appreciate your time. Thank you. All right, there we go. John Efford. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to be speaking with Jen Crow, Senior Director at Choices for Youth. Also, the official leader, the official opposition is Tony Wickham. He's also in the queue. Air ambulance, and whatever you want to talk about. Don't go away. Welcome back to the program. Where am I going here, David? Line number which? Line number 3. Let's go. Line number 3. Speaking more to the Senior Director with Choices for Youth. That's Jen Crow. Hi, Jen. You're on the air.
Hi, Patty. Thanks for having me.
Happy to have you on. So we had Rob Nolan on from MNL to talk about this precise report regarding housing, especially in rural. Where's Choices for Youth come in on this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Patty, over the last several years, we've been seeing an upwards trend of young people coming through our doors who are unfortunately traveling to St. John's to access services. And as you know, I mean, there's lots of young people across our province who choose to make a move into St. John's, but unfortunately, many of the youth who we support felt that they didn't have a choice. So the stories that we would hear would be young people who would show up at our doors, with a bag on their back because they have nowhere else to go. Providers across our province telling us stories about, the solution to emergency housing for these young people is simply and only to put them on a bus and send them into St. John's. So these are some of the stories that we hear all the time. And for us as a youth-serving organization with a goal of ending youth homelessness, the question that we started to pose ourselves is, what is our role in this? And how do we support these young people closer to home so that they have a choice and they don't have to travel into St. John's in order to access those services? So that's kind of where this partnership with Municipalities NL came into play to say, we recognize that municipalities have a real role to play here around supporting the development of affordable housing. And there's also a real role for nonprofit organizations and other service providers who in many cases are the ones owning, operating shelters, supportive housing in communities. So how do we work together to get a better picture of rural and remote homelessness in this province? And then how do we work together on some of those solutions?
So no question, if you're moving into the city to access services which are not available in rural parts of the province, that leads to the potential for more and more youth to be homeless. But let's just say we expand the type of services offered by Choices for Youth to different hubs in different parts of the province. That still doesn't necessarily build any homes. That still doesn't necessarily keep a youth who's in crisis from following down a path where it leads them to be homeless and or other problems. So how does that work? If we expand your services, how does that necessarily address some of the concerns they would experience in their own community? They'd still be looking for services, they still might be homeless or precariously housed, or so expand on that for me so I have a better understanding.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Patty. I think that's a great point. So what we often talk about is that it's got to be support services, those wraparound supports that Rob alluded to earlier, and it has to be housing too. So our approach at Choices for Youth is we operate across the continuum of housing. So everything from emergency shelters to affordable housing. So just to give you a sense, we support about 179 young people a year with affordable and supportive housing in our community. And Patty, what we're seeing right now in terms of the need, we have 150 young people sitting on a wait list looking for housing. So our approach is really, let's get these young people housed as quickly as possible. That requires building more affordable housing. But then also let's meet them where they are, because a lot of the youth who we work with, many of whom have been experiencing homelessness for a significant amount of time, they're grappling with complex mental health issues, substance use challenges, family breakdown. So if we give them housing and we don't support them with anything else, then the chances are that they'll just end up back homeless. So how do we meet them with the infrastructure supports, but also those wraparound supports? So that's kind of where we come into play. We try to do both of those things, Patty. And I think when we look outside of St. John's and our potential role across the province, we know that this has to happen through partners. We're not interested in kind of swooping in and starting from the ground up. We recognize that there's partners across this province who've been doing this for a really long time. And our goal is to work with them and to understand and then to figure out how do we work in those communities to offer a blend of wraparound supports and direct housing provision as well.
Wraparound support to me sounds like affordable housing, because when we say, for instance, the Comfort Inn and the transitional rooms there, and people say wraparound supports, which makes sense because wraparound supports are required, but I'm not so sure everybody has a firm understanding of exactly what that means. Same thing with affordable housing. Affordable housing is not just a one thing, it's a variety of things. So when you say wraparound support, what is it, who's involved, and what disciplines do they represent?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about wraparound supports, I think to your point, it means something different to everybody. But for us, it means a combination of accessible primary care, mental health, food security, education, employment, and family stability. So when we can meet a young person, so just to give you an example to kind of illustrate this, a young person comes in our doors at our Carters Hill Place Integrated Youth Services site. They come through our doors, they can get a hot meal. While they're eating their hot meal, they can wait and see a physician, like literally across the hall from where they're eating. They can go downstairs, they can have a conversation with a therapist. They can be connected to housing supports either on-site or connected to housing through community with a service provider on-site. So that's really what we're talking about is, for a lot of the youth who we support, and we did significant research a few years back across the province around what are the needs of youth, provincially when it comes to housing and supports. And one of the things that we heard is that so many youth are forced to tell their stories over and over again, often many times in a single day, right? So they're told, you got to call this person to get mental health supports. Oh, you're looking for a doctor? Well, you have to call this line. And they're sent all over the city to access services. So our goal is to say, we know that that's not working. So how do we provide as many of those services as possible under one roof so a young person can come in, they can tell their story one time and get multiple needs met. So that's kind of our goal. And I think when we look at what the research is telling us through the housing report, many of the service providers, municipalities, and folks with lived experience really talked about it. It's almost impossible to separate the challenges around housing insecurity and homelessness and mental health challenges in this province right now, because they really do go hand in hand, and mental health challenges oftentimes can perpetuate issues surrounding homelessness. And so the question is then, how do we work collaboratively provincially to tackle both issues simultaneously and make sure that it's long-term mental health solutions and affordable housing both at the same time?
Yeah, like most things in this world, we react after the fact here far too often, right? If we're talking about plugging some of the gaps in mental health and addiction services, if we get the people before they end up in a spiral which leads them to live in a tent behind the Colonial Building, then some of these problems are, reduced. The frequency or the prevalence is reduced because we got to before you ended up in that situation, as opposed to what we do now. Once we find that you're in this position, once we find that you need help, whether or not you've actually come forward to access it or not, then we've got a bigger, more complex, more costly problem. Same thing in healthcare, which I think we should include healthcare, mental health, and addictions all in the same breath anyway. But we just sometimes are far too reactive. It becomes chaotic. It becomes extremely expensive. It becomes extremely complicated, and it mightn't necessarily have to be that way.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I think, what we've seen, certainly through our own programs, is we know there's solutions here. We know there's ways of doing this differently and more effectively. So just to give you an example, Patty, like with our programs that we offer at Choices for Youth, we have in some of our programs seen up to an 88% decrease in emergency room visits. We see, significant increase in high school graduation rates. And those are in programs that are focused on providing stability. That includes affordable affordable housing. It includes wraparound supports. So, while we're proud of the fact that we were able to house close to 180 young people last year, we know that what's keeping those young people housed is the fact that they're not in and out of the emergency room. They have their high school education. They're now successfully employed in some cases in one of our 4 social enterprises. So it's getting folks housed, but it's making sure that they have what they need to have the stability to remain housed. And so it's got to be all of those things. And I think for us as an agency, we've been around for almost 35 years now, and we've learned over the years that we can provide shelter, we can provide supportive housing, affordable housing. But if a young person is in mental health crisis, using substances, has no stability or supports in their lives, then that affordable and supportive housing is only going to get them so far. So it's how do we get them, that housing first principle, how do we get them housed first, how do we get them supported, and then how do we kind of position them so that they can succeed in whatever their goals may be as well.
And I will inevitably hear the same type of pushback. When people make bad decisions, they have to live with their decisions. You made your own bed and now you sleep in it. It's just oversimplifying really complex issues here. And I hate to put things down to dollars and cents, because we're talking about human lives, human safety, dignity, and hope for the future. It becomes more expensive. If we allow people to continue to struggle, then their struggles are going to be more interaction with the healthcare system, possibly the criminal justice system, all of which are the most expensive things in the country. So if you're concerned about saving money, you want to be fiscally thrifty, then let's get to them before they become a concern for themselves, their families, society, safety, and otherwise, because that's where the costs start to pile up, as opposed to getting them supports up front, as opposed to after the fact that they find themselves in really difficult circumstances. Jen, I'll give you the final thoughts before I have to go.
Yeah, Patty. I think that's bang on, and I would just want to read you a quick quote from one of the folks who we spoke to who are experiencing homelessness. So they said, "We all deserve somewhere safe to lock a door at night and sleep soundly. There comes a point in life where everybody can slip. Stuff happens. When it happens, what would you like to see for you?" And I think that really illustrates your comment there. That there's the only thing that separates a young person, myself as a young person, versus a homeless young person, is that I have people in my life who will support me if I lose my job, if something happens to me. Many of the young people who come through our doors simply do not have that support. So we try to meet them where we are. We try to be preventative wherever possible. And then we try to address their immediate needs, get them housed and get them what they need. And I think what we're seeing right now across the province is that there needs to be an investment in setting targets around affordable housing. So Canadian Mortgage Housing Corporation said that we need to build 60,000 new units by 2030 in order to keep up with the demand for affordable housing. So we need to set targets around that as a province and be ambitious and create a plan. And we need to complement that with investing in wraparound and mental health supports through community agencies and other providers so that we can meet those immediate needs, but also build towards a province and communities where there's just more affordable housing on offer for young people and for other populations too.
Appreciate the time, Jen.
Thanks so much, Patty. Appreciate it.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Jen Crow, Senior Director with Choices for Youth. Let's take a break. When we come back, Air Ambulance. Welcome back. Let's go. Line 6. Eugene, you're on the air.
Good morning, Patty. How are you doing?
Okay, you?
Good. Thank you to you and David and VOCM for taking my call and trying to explain to the general public what we're doing with our air ambulance system here in the province. And we've been at that since 2018, as you know. Patty, and we've been trying to get it based closer to the patient, which makes sense to everyone. And if we can only get that through the government aid, we'll be winning. We had Dave Callahan on with you Monday morning. And I tell you, David summed it up. And there's no way I can do it better. Why we should have air ambulance based in Gander and not in St. John's. And I got talking to an air traffic controller yesterday, and he said Gander Airport is available for service flights 98% of the time. 98% of the time. Now, compare that to Torbay Airport, there's no comparison. So we, like just recently, we had air ambulance in St. John's that couldn't get out to the rest of the province, Newfoundland and Labrador, because of the weather. and on freezing rain or whatever, and gander was available. But that's just an example. And I understand yesterday in that conversation also with the people from air traffic control, the guy from air traffic control, that it looks like that they're going to lose their dispatch. And we heard that news before. The government had denied it, but they haven't confirmed it either. So that's not good. So an update, and I'll be right quick, is now we have 5 air ambulances in the system, supposedly, 2 government, 2 and 3 contractor, 1 PAL and 2 EVAs. So right now they're saying that could be reduced to 3. And they would increase it if it would need be. That's what they're saying there now in the update I got. So no mention of based out of Gander, still, Goose Bay and St. John's. And like Mr. Callahan said, and I'm saying it, I've been saying it for a long, long time, why would you need the air ambulance at the destination? It doesn't make sense, and I talk to a lot of people, Patty, because I'm doing a lot of traveling, and I tell you, it don't make sense to anyone what they're doing, and we have had people died waiting for air ambulance. To our friends in Labrador, a little bit of good news, I guess. Well, not good, good news that they're saying that the system will stay like they are. They're going to have aircraft 24-hour service with Skidovac 5 days a week, 24 hours. So, and they're saying there's no intention to produce the level of medical or Skidovac service in Labrador. That's like that's provided now. So that's good news because they've been on board with us to try to get a better system, and they need it. I mean, Air Borealis is there now, and I don't know who's going to be there in the future, but we'll have to see. But it's going to be contracted also, and so they're saying, Patty, that the pilots that's with the government aircraft, I don't know if I need to mention this, but they're going to be have the opportunity to go into the system with the contractors, and they'll still be paid by transportation and infrastructure. Excuse me. So just want to mention that. So there's going to be a 24-hour 7 helicopter service for Cornerbrook, for Eastern, Western, and Central. But like we aired before, this is not mentioned now, that Gander was going to be a base for the helicopter service. Air Force One was going to be based at the Gander. That's not there now. It's going to be UBS, West Coast, Cornerbrook, Goose Bay, Gander, and St. John's. So looks like they got that status took away now. So, it's not good enough, Patty. It's not good enough. And I understand. I just got the information that 40% of those flights are non-emergency. So if they're non-emergency, because they've been saying they have trouble getting the personnel, non-emergency means that you don't need an RN or someone in that profession. You can do it with an EMT. So there's no reason why they can't operate at a Gander and have the medical people that's needed for that, and like an EMT can do the job. So what they're saying is, doesn't make sense. If the job is supposed to be in Gander, then, well, the best of luck with that. They'll have to come to Gander. They'll have to work in Gander. Don't mean to say that they got to live on the Avalon if they're in the air ambulance system. We are losing out. The patients are suffering and dying, and the government got to wake up and listen to people like us, like our group, and like the general public, and get this done.
I appreciate the time, Eugene.
Patty, is there any questions?
No, I don't. I think you made your pitch very similar to how Mr. Callahan made it earlier in the week. I understand the issue.
You do, brother, and you agree with Mr. Callahan, and thank you, Patty, for your support. Really appreciate it.
Appreciate the time.
Have a good one, brother.
You too, Eugene.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye. Let's roll line 1 before we go to a break. Caller, you're on the air. Good morning, line number 1, you're on the air. Going once. Line number 1. Caller, hello? Talk about HVAC. Go ahead. You're on the air.
Hello?
Hello?
Yes.
Go ahead. You're on the air.
Yes, I called in. You said in your preamble about any customers with Atlantic Standard HVAC to call in.
Yes, sir. You were one, I assume.
I'm one of them, yes, and I'm a senior, and we got scammed over pretty good, but look at it.
What happened? What kind of dealings did you have with them?
I got an invoice here. I had 12 years warranty on parts and labour. And now all that's gone down the drain. He dissolved the company. I don't know if you read what the CBC, the investigator, if you read it all about him.
I read the entire story, yes, sir.
Well, he was operating here with me under the name Raymond Stevenson.
Yeah, and his name is Raymond Kalanga.
Yes. So, and that fraud right there?
Well, it's certainly... You're duping people on purpose. That's absolutely true, because if you're operating as Raymond Stevens in this province and you go to Google up Raymond Stevens and Atlantic Standard HVAC, you'd come up with no results, as opposed to if you were able to research Raymond Kalanga and the trouble he was having in Ontario and the amount of money he owed and the threat of there's apparently going to be a warrant put for his arrest. So if we knew exactly who we're dealing with, many people might have steered away from the company.
Well, this is it. This is what I'm saying. But, and it's something, I mean, can he be charged here in Openline? How did he get in here and set up this company? I mean, he had his own employees, so he had to be involved with workers' comp and everything else. He had to be registered. And who approved it? Did the government approve it?
Well, the government has to approve a license to operate and for a company to be incorporated here. So I don't know, but it's an excellent question that you're asking, because he absolutely did purposefully and willfully dupe his customers. I mean, and it's not just operating under that name. It's the fact that people are getting invoices like you described. A lady in the news story, Daphne Sheaves, she has 2 mini splits, she's getting charged for 3. So, I mean, there's lots of examples for how the way they were operating their business was completely unfair and fraudulent, likely.
Yes, and is there any, is there anyone going to do anything about it? I mean, to me, it's a crime, there.
It's a good question, and we're due to have the Justice Minister on the programme, because there's lots of things on his table or plate as well. So I'll put this to him, because what you're putting forward here makes a lot of sense to me. So I'm going to get you an answer to that important question. How's that?
Well, Paddy, thanks for that, because that's what I want to know. And another point there is this Vault financial company that done the finances, and apparently he had that set up in his name. So, I mean, if you're paying a monthly payment, he's taking that money and shoving it in his pocket. By
the sounds of it, yeah. He's certainly broken or violated the Consumer Protection Act in Ontario. So it's a good point you're making here this morning, sir. We will see if we can get an answer from the Department of Justice.
Well, okay. Thank you very much.
I appreciate your time.
Okay.
Take care.
You.
You're welcome. That's a good question. Let's take a break. When we come back, Tony Wakeham's next. Don't go away. Welcome back. Let's go to line number 5. Say good morning to the PC member for Stephenville Port Report. He's the leader of the official opposition, Tony Wakeham. Tony, you're on the air.
Hey, good morning, Paddy. I wanted to talk to you this morning quickly about the Premier's decision to shut down the House of Assembly yesterday. And I want to read you a little quote from January 2012 that was made by opposition MHA Andrew Parsons at the time, and now Minister Parsons. And he said in this article, "The decision to open the House is too important to leave to the whim of the Premier. There should be a regular and predictable schedule, removing the discretion of government to close or cancel the House when it becomes inconvenient for them." Parsons said, "The people of the province deserve to have the House open so their representatives can discuss and debate issues important to them." Now, I can't say it any better than that. The Premier turns around and says, his office, that we shut down the House because the necessary business of the session was concluded. Well, let me tell tell you there are still 13 bills still on the order paper, including the Bill 22, Management of Information, which was suspended last March, brought in again, and now suspended again. And then there was Bill 68, which has to do with the Lands Act, which is urgently needed, and that's the whole issue around Crown lands. And there's the Health Quality Council legislation. So for the Premier to simply say that the necessary business was concluded is totally wrong and insulting to the people of Newfoundland and Labrador.
I saw the order paper. There's no way, because even if you talk about some of the issues that are being debated, housing and healthcare and the fisheries, cost of living and whatever else, of course, there's never going to be an end to those debates, which means there should never be an end necessarily to, keeping the House open as per the schedule that I have been provided, which was not adhered to. So there's no real rationale there. I will add to it the Information Act. I'll also add there's been plenty of time for the government to come up with legislation to amend some of the Crown lands issue. I would suggest there's plenty of time to come up with legislation to accommodate the psychiatric nurse program. So, I'm not pretending that these things are easy piece of business. You simply just show up at work and an hour later you got legislation crafted. But we've had time, and so those three just pop into the front of my mind.
Totally, and that's what's frustrating. And so what are the reasons why the House of Assembly actually closed? I suspect it was closed because the Premier didn't like the heat that was being put on his ministers in relation to their responses when it comes to the bodies that they didn't know about that were being stored in freezer containers outside the Health Science Centre, or the total fiasco around the travel nurses contract, when at the same time as they say we didn't know anything about it, we have the Premier's office, which was the first point of contact. We have emails from the Premier's own staff to and from the CEO of this company, and then the government trying to distance themselves, and the Minister Health standing up and saying, well, that's all operational issues. The Premier, the Minister of Health, you're in charge of the government of Newfoundland and Labrador, and we're spending millions of dollars of taxpayers' money. You ought to know.
For sure. And I know you've got a press conference coming up at 11. And it's the entire PC caucus, which I know you're not going to tell me what you're going to talk about at 11, but maybe something very much akin to what we're talking about. But some of the protests has been fish harvesters up in the gallery, which they had to clear out the other day. They're talking about free enterprise. So I think everyone has a different definition of what that means. When you say it, what do you mean? And what do you think the impact, if those structural changes come to play, what do you think the impact will be in the communities? So what's your definition? What do you think the impact will be?
When I think about what free enterprise is, I listen to what the harvesters are saying, and one of them was on your show earlier, and that's what they're talking about. They're talking about the ability, to be able to go out and catch their quotas and have them processed. When I think of things like, let me give you an example in Steve Mill, for example, when we talk where lobster is king, and lobster is a product that's usually, for the most part, sent out live, shipped out live. There is no processing done. But there are times last year when, in cases where the lobster fishermen were told not to go and clear their pots, not to go out. They weren't allowed to go and empty their pots. The buyers were telling them we're not buying anymore. So is that because they don't have the capacity? Is that because we need more capacity? Would outside buyers help in those situations? So what we're talking about here is how do we maximize the value of our fishery? Now, we all understand there are seasons, and that's what we need to adhere to. We all know the crab, for example, has to be caught within a particular period of time. Otherwise, we wind up in the soft shell markets. We know that this year we're going to hopefully have an increase in the cod quota. So again, how do we make sure that we set this up in a way that at the end of the day we maximize out the value of our fishing industry? And that's what's important here. So it's not only about the crab and the lobster and the cod, then we've got the capelin and the herring and all of these different species that we're allowed to catch, that fishers are allowed to go out and catch. How do we make sure that we get them processed in a quality way and on a timely way? And does that mean we need extra capacity? Does that mean we need another form of purchasing? I don't know. But that's where the Premier and his minister went out this past summer and sat down with harvesters and talked to them. And these were issues that they brought to them at the time. And I think what you're seeing in these demonstrations this week is the frustration around that. Because, when you go out and sit down and have these meetings, there's an expectation that there will be some action taken coming out of those meetings. But unfortunately, the Premier and his minister, proudly stood up and talked about all the meetings they had. but there's no action associated with. So now what you have is a frustration once again on the steps of Confederation Building from harvesters wondering about what's going to happen this year. Are we going to be told not to go fishing? Are we going to be told limits? Are we going to wind up dumping crab overboard? Is cod going to spoil on the wharf because we don't have processing capacity? All of this is, and I don't think this is about blame game. I don't think it's about blaming processors or blaming harvesters or anyone like that. What it needs to be about is maximizing the value of our industry to ensure that our plant workers work longer, get more hours, to make sure that our communities, not only in rural Newfoundland, but even in St. John's here, there are people and businesses that are heavily involved in the fishing industry. So this fishing industry is too important for us to simply, and the government, the Premier and the Minister, to sit back and allow this mistrust to continue. They need to be sitting down, and I thought they were doing that last year, but it hasn't been done.
Successive governments for decades have done the exact same thing, which is basically nothing. So very quickly, expanding the processing sector with more licenses, I don't see how that allows people to work more. I don't know if it's going to cost any jobs. John Efford says he doesn't think it will. I don't know how that makes people work any more hours. I will add to that. We have plants that are operating in this province. Every single snow crab processing plant last year had some temporary foreign workers. So we're not talking about expanding a whole lot of employment opportunity for people in the province, because his history tells us very clearly that the plants are leaning on TFW to be able to even man up or to have the human resource in place to process whatever. And last year in snow crab, every plant had some TFWs working inside. So, I think that's some of the reality with the expansion of jobs. Very quickly, because I know you have to go. You're now in full-throated support for Mr. Poilievre's slogan of axe the tax and the concept of doing away with the carbon tax. Would your government advocate for replacing it with something to talk about influencing the transition, the pace of play with the transition takes place? I know people don't like the word tax, so it's easy enough to say, well, let's axe that tax. Would your government replace it with something else? And if so, what?
Patty, what I have talked about continuously is the use of technology versus taxation.
Give us an example of the technology.
Technology talks about the idea of expanding our hydro development opportunities. We already know there are proposals in front of us related to wind farms. So there's all kinds of things I think that this province of Newfoundland and Labrador can be a leader in. But instead of, let's go back and look at the fact that the Prime Minister of Canada, this Liberal Prime Minister, turned around and spent $30 billion on a pipeline out west, but refused to take an equity stake in a project down here that was green, that's actually helped reducing carbon emissions in Nova Scotia. So there's lots of opportunity for Newfoundland and Labrador to be an integral part of this solution for all of Canada. And we have the opportunity right here to do that, and we need to expand on that.
Appreciate the time, Tony.
Thank you, Patty.
Take care. Bye-bye. Bye. Tony Wakeham, PC member, Stephenville Port, and of course leader of the official opposition. And they do have an entire PC caucus press conference coming up right now. Okay, let's take a break for the news. When we come back, we'll talk about the visa program for people leaving Gaza. Sean wants to talk about how they get paid in the mining sector and whatever you want to talk about. Don't go away.
You're listening to a rebroadcast of VOCM Open Line. Have your say by calling 709-273-5211 or 1-888-590-8626 and listen live weekday mornings at 9 a.m.
Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 2. Good morning, Carmela. You're on the air.
Hi, Patty. Thanks for taking my call.
No problem.
I'm calling in this morning. It's been 3 months since I started advocating with my friends Marilyn and Miran. They're permanent residents here in Newfoundland, and we've been advocating on behalf of their brothers who've been surviving Israel's genocide in Gaza. They're 2 brothers who are 19 and 20 years old. They've been trying to reunite with their sisters here in Newfoundland since January. They've been waiting over 3 months after fleeing, living in a tent, surviving in an active war zone that's being starved, ravaged. I mean, we've all seen it. And still, I read yesterday that 0 applicants to Canada's emergency program to evacuate family members of permanent residents from Gaza have actually made it to Canada. And I just, why? Why have 0 applicants to this program landed in Canada, Patty?
Where are they? Are they all still in Gaza? Because my understanding is they've also been displaced to other nearby countries.
Yeah, so I think the applicants have been displaced, I think, primarily into Egypt if they've managed to get out. So over January and February, we were able to raise enough money through our GoFundMe campaign to pay for a family member of the Kaskin brothers to fly to Cairo carrying $10,000 US, that's over 13,000 Canadian dollars cash, carried on their person to pay to the Egyptian government, to basically bribe the Egyptian government through a travel agency in Cairo to have Marilyn and Imran's brothers, Marilyn and Imran are PR holders in Canada, to have their loved ones added to a list to cross the Rafah border. They had to carry $13,000 into Egypt to pay to a travel agency. This is completely unconscionable. It's unimaginable to me that this is our country's emergency visa program. That to gain passage out of Gaza, out of an active war zone, our country has devised a program in which the only way to actually get out, to have your application processed, is to pay 13,000 Canadian dollars to the Egyptian government.
So even inside some of the what they call special measures and extended family issues, they say that if you are indeed eligible, your family members can also apply under some restrictions. They're talking about this comes to an end when there's 1,000 complete TRV applications have been received, but that's all fine and dandy. Then they say upon entering Canada, for the most part, you can extend your stay for up to 3 years as a temporary resident, but none of that applies if no one's actually landed here. Yeah, no one has actually landed here. No one's able to get. So in order to get out of Gaza, you have to pay this fee. So they're out of Gaza. Now they're in Egypt. They on March 3rd, they had their biometrics submitted. To even submit your biometrics so your application can be processed, so the visa can even be possibly issued. They're not even guaranteed that their visas will be issued yet. To even submit their biometrics and have their security checks, people need to exit Gaza, which is a impossible task. So few people have $5,000 USD per person in cash that can be presented in Cairo by a friend or family member. Once that's accomplished, if you can accomplish that, then you submit your biometrics for your application to even be processed. So now we have these two brothers, 19 and 20 years old, stranded in Cairo with their biometrics. Where are they? Somewhere in limbo between here and Ottawa. Who knows what is happening? It's a completely opaque system. We contact IRCC constantly. We constantly contact our minister, our member of parliament, Minister Seamus O'Regan. We're in constant contact, and we're coming up blank. We have no answers. We have no timeline. There's zero timeline for how long this will take to get those brothers to Canada to be reunited with their family. I don't know what the hurdles are beyond the cash situation, as you rightfully point to, because it's one thing to put these plans or special extended measures in place, but quite another to actually act on. It seems like we were able to do it much more, I don't know if the right word is efficiently or quickly, when we talk about other people being displaced by war, what have you. I'll point directly to Ukraine. We
booked private jets to Ukraine to bring people over. They were out of there in a flash. There was no waiting. And I don't think it's cynical to say that this is an issue of race. If these people didn't have brown skin, if they were blonde-haired, blue-eyed people, they would be out of there right now. And it is despicable that level of racism is occurring in our immigration programs in Canada.
The examples are there, how it was handled in Ukraine and setting up a shop in Poland and actively helping and recruiting and paying for them to travel to Canada. Not to say it's a bad thing, but it's in stark contrast to how the government is handling the issues in Gaza. It's amazing stuff.
Exactly, and it shouldn't. People shouldn't be displaced. Realistically, Patty, we wouldn't even be here advocating for this if our country would take a stand in the way that they did with the Ukraine and demand a ceasefire. And this level of advocacy that we're doing for these two brothers amongst thousands and thousands of people applying to this program wouldn't be necessary. And our minister, our foreign minister, Jolie is nowhere to be found on this issue. Where is she now? This week she's in Israel. She's shaking hands with war criminals, people who are currently being taken to The Hague for war crimes and crimes against humanity, instead of Is she at the Rafah border trying to get families of her citizens to safety? Is she using her power to lobby for a ceasefire? No. Is she putting forward her support for South Africa's case in the International Court of Justice? No. Is she putting an embargo on Canada's weapons sales to Israel? No. She's doing none of these things. She is repeatedly doubling down on her support for Israel and doing nothing for Canadian residents and citizens to evacuate their families, to get them to safety, or alternately to call for a ceasefire so that their departure from their homelands would not be necessary. It's totally shocking, the Canadian response, and this very, very meager offering of this immigration program that could do something for a small number of people, and has proven to be completely ineffective.
I'm not going to disagree, but let's just say even if there was today a ceasefire, the way that Gaza has been rubbled, there's still going to be plenty of people who are going to need and want to get out. I mean, a functional, manageable society, given the extent of the bombing, has left it probably uninhabitable for many, many people who are currently residents or citizens in Gaza. It's just remarkable to see the images that are coming from that part of the world. Carmela, I appreciate your time. Thanks for the call.
Thanks, Patty.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, let's take a break. Sean, you stay right there to talk about pay in the mining sector. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number 3. Sean, you're on the air.
Good morning, Patty. Having a great show this morning.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for tuning in and appreciate the call.
Yeah, nice message there from John Eckford there. I'd say his dad would be proud of him this morning. Rooting behind the harvesters there, but that's not what I called for, Patty. I'm sure you've heard a lot about this gold mining and stuff here in central Newfoundland. And it just floors me to see what kind of wage that these people pay. I've been a rotational worker for 30 years, back and forth. Western Canada, I've been proud to say, I guess, been all over this beautiful country. And I haven't seen a place that will do the same job and pay so much less, I know we spent the last few years now in Northern Ontario, and your average pay up there as an operator or a truck driver, but just for an excavator operator up there, they're anywhere between, under experience, Patty, anywhere between 37 to some places will pay 42. They get their time and a half. They get their pension plan and their RSPs and their safety bonuses and stuff, and they're making a pretty good living. And we'll come to Newfoundland, and we have this big project, big find we have found in central Newfoundland, and what work we're going to have. And these guys, I don't know where this money goes. I truly don't. I don't know if it's like the old Newfoundland way. It always goes back to the merchant or what. But you go up there now, and it's $30 an hour straight time, and you're mining the same mineral. I heard that Peter on there this morning, and nobody talks about that sort of stuff. What it's taken for the average working man to help feed his family in this province. It blows me away where this place has gone. You can't walk the streets. You can't leave nothing in the garage. You can't leave it unlocked. I have family in Labrador, and every second day they're down there collecting money to send people to St. John's because they're sick. And we've all this work in this province that we all could be working and putting money into our province. The windmills, what an opportunity for work in windmills. I know fellas that I work with all over Canada that worked in somebody else's backyard that don't want to work in their own backyard and is going around signing petitions not to have to work in their own backyard.
Yeah, that's not really why they're circulating the petitions. But a comment you made about where does the money go? I don't know exactly what that means, but the companies choose to pay what they're willing to pay. People will take the jobs or they won't. So the money simply remains inside the company. Increase revenue, increase profit, right?
Absolutely, Patty. And it's you know, and we've had some good projects on this island, you know, Patty, and beyond Labrador as well. You know, that had union jobs there that paid some good money, Patty. But there's only a certain amount of people that's able to get into that union, and they've been in there all their lifetime, you know. And they got the seniority in there. It's hard for fellas that been out west for a long time to be able to come home and get into those unions, to get into those jobs. So that's where your rotational workers come from. You can't get to work on the island. You just can't get it. You have to go away. And then they open up Valentine Lake. Caliber bails them out, $360 million or whatever it is. And it's nothing given to the men and women that's up there, up to their guts now in mud and water up there trying to kick off. Supposed to be one of the biggest mines in eastern Canada. You know, like it's, and we have this windmill project coming. You know, like so many people against that. I haven't heard one person say, and I've been listening to the news and social media and stuff, and I haven't heard one person say, you know, maybe if we get that something goes on and we can help people. And we can all get in the room and have a chat. And well, I won't put that underneath your cabin, or I won't do this, or I won't do that, or come up with something. We're adults here. We're not kids. And come up with something that's going to help Newfoundland prosper.
What does that mean? Come up with something. Something like what, for example?
Well, if they got a claim of land that's going to go next to my house or next to my cabin, well, can they say, but no, I'm not going to stick it right beside your cabin. These windmills are all over eastern Canada. We went to a trip in Nova Scotia last summer. We stopped there and we were talking to farmers and stuff there that right at the border of Nova Scotia and Manitoba there, and they had zero issue with any of the windmill farm that they had there. And I have friends of mine in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. He sent me video and pictures of being right underneath the blades of a windmill. Like, it's amazing the amount of bullshit that you hear sometimes, what comes out of people's mouth that's trying to save a cabin. I understand it. I understand that, Patty.
Well, some of these issues, though, are a little bit more complicated. That cabin issue, for instance, I can't remember the name of that area or that lake, but the problem there is that they had the land lottery all the while knowing that this was going to be part of the reality in the very near future, and yet people weren't told. So they spent their money to buy the land, to maybe build the cabin, just to find out, wait now, this is what's being proposed here. If I had to know that, I wouldn't have bought the land. So that makes that a bit different.
I agree.
Wind farms elsewhere, I think some of the complication here is a couple of things. It's the size and the geographical footprint, for instance, on the Port-au-Port Peninsula. Some 40% of the peninsula with the wind farms. In addition to that, in those other jurisdictions, some of the energy, all of the energy being generated is actually going back on the public grid, and they're being able to avail of what's ever being generated, which is not the case here. The wind, for the large part, is going to be used to generate hydrogen and ammonia to ship elsewhere. So I think there's a couple of differences between an Ontario wind farm and the proposals here. So I'll let you react to that. But I do think they're not entirely different, but there's enough differences to make it part of the conversation. What do you think?
Yes, an eyesore is an eyesore, no matter where it is. If it's on the left side of your face or on the right side of your face, it doesn't matter. It's still an eyesore. So that was the one biggest thing that they're talking about on the West Coast was. And I have family over there on the West Coast there, and there's a lot of people looking forward to that place, Patty. After the mill shut down and after all, it's a sin what people are trying to live off of and what they're trying to feed their family off of. Taxes going up again, another 23% from our wonderful people up in Ottawa there. I mean, and we're trying to stop projects and trying to stop work. Like, there got to be enough people on this island that got sense enough that can get together to help. You're not gonna satisfy everybody, no matter what. Me, you, don't matter who it is. Everybody isn't going to be satisfied. But at some point in time, we have to stand up like the fishermen and say, enough is enough. We've been pushed down now and kept down long enough that men and women shouldn't have to be leaving this province. Single moms shouldn't not have to be wondering how they're going to feed a youngster. There shouldn't be 28 bodies in St. John's in a can. Should never be.
Okay.
And why? Because we don't want to have a project, so we don't want to have money or oil or whatever. Like, it does not make sense. And everybody is suffering. And money is what makes this world go around, no matter who likes it or not. And Patty, thank you very much for your time, bud. I really enjoyed having a little chat with you there, but I certainly hope to get something straightened out.
I appreciate making time for the show. Thanks for the call.
Thanks, buddy.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
You know, not every wind farm is exactly the same, but I get his point. So I do think there is an issue that people point to, because if you're familiar with a wind farm, whether you've seen them in the Shetland Islands, whether you've seen them in Ontario or Nova Scotia or wherever, what we're talking about here, or you've seen them in Ramia, or you've seen them up the Southern Shore, what we're talking about for these proposals is different. It just is. I mean, a wind turbine that peaks out at 200 meters above the ground is just a different kettle of fish. It's just a different concept. It's a different issue. It comes with different ramifications. And whether or not you think some people are exaggerating one concern or another, so be it. You bring your opinion to the airwaves as well. But it is different. Just quite simply, vastly different than what we've seen in the past with other wind farms. And I do think part of the conversation is the fact that we don't know a couple of things yet. We have no idea how they're going to integrate with the public grid. I think that's a concern. So whether they need power, what they're going to be able to pay for it, when they have excess power to sell back, what that's going to look like, how does that dovetail with the other issues that we're all facing regarding our power bills anyway, whether it be Newfoundland Power rate application hikes, return on investment requirements from 8.5% to 9.85%, whether as it pertains to Muskrat Falls, as it pertains to Newfoundland Labrador Hydro's looking at forecasted supply and demand in the future, and how that's going to be covered off. So again, and we still don't know what kind of tax subsidies they're going to be able to avail of. And because they don't know and we don't know, no one's made a final investment decision. Because unless there's a well understood definition of green, which is going to be different for proposals by Everwind or anybody else in Nova Scotia versus this province. If you got to go to the public grid in Nova Scotia, some 58% of the energy produced there is coal or coke fired versus in the neighborhood of 80% in this province, which comes with a much different associated definition of what is quote unquote green. Let's take a break for the news. Don't go away. Welcome back to the show. Let's go to line number one and say good morning to Student Union President out of the Grenfell campus of Memorial University. That's Aditya Bello. Aditya, you're on the air.
Hello, how are you today?
I'm very well, thanks for asking. How did I do with pronouncing your name properly?
You did well.
Okay, good. I appreciate it. So the issue here is pretty clear. It's getting what you paid for. The students out of Grenfell will charge a $100 Wi-Fi fee. And, of course, even though Grenfell did install some hotspots, it became completely unreliable. People are getting kicked off. Only one computer attached to a printer. So lots of issues in the aftermath of the cyber attack. So what's the student union looking for?
Well, we know that there's really nothing they can do until the Wi-Fi gets fixed. That's why we're pushing for them to at least issue a partial refund to the fees, to the student services fees, because we're clearly not getting what we're paying for. We've lost access to Microsoft. We've lost access to files that we've had. I'm a third year, so I've lost access to 3 years of, files that I had on Microsoft, and there's nothing they can do to get that back for us.
So what has that meant for real-life implications with it being unable to access that information? What has that meant for your education?
It's really put us back because people would have templates on Microsoft that they would use for presentations and things, but now everybody's having to switch to, Google and try to get acquainted with Google because we've always been with Microsoft.
Has that been a problem? Because, I mean, I'm not trying to dismiss the concern, but has that been an actual difficult problem for people to overcome, just accommodating or understanding Google versus Microsoft?
It's been a problem because it's all about accessibility. If you are used to something and then suddenly, it changes without, your consent or, having prior knowledge to it, it's overwhelming to have to deal with everything happening all at once.
Haditza, when it comes to asking for a partial refund, what are you asking for specifically?
We're just asking for the university to issue the refund as an acknowledgement of how this whole process has disrupted our education.
So does that mean you want the entirety of the $100 back, or is there some other acknowledgement you're looking for in addition to that?
We're not asking for the entire $100 because money has been put into other places to, try to fix the network and Wi-Fi issue. But it's just a way for the university to show that they're in support and they acknowledge what has happened and how it has disrupted us.
Fair enough. And what has the printer issue comes across as a little bit odd to me. I can understand the Wi-Fi issue, but hardwiring a computer to a printer that's part of the in-house network, I'm not sure why that's the case. Do you understand why there's only one computer hooked up to a printer on campus?
I still find that hard to understand. We have that one printer in the library, and then there's another printer in our IT service. So that's how we print, but just one computer connected directly to the printer. I don't understand why that still is the way it is.
Yeah, that kind of is a confusing issue for me. So for printing services, does that mean there's big log jams at these computers to get some printing done, or what are students doing?
Well, students, I think they haven't really publicized that you can go to IT as well to print. So some students have, been going off campus to Staples to go try and print, their essays and whatnot. And then others have had to, like students that have events, if posters are on the wall, color is what grasps people's attention. And then if the posters are black and white, nobody knows what, clubs and societies are doing. Nobody knows what caucuses are doing. So everybody's trying to, adjust to what we have access to right now.
It's a strange set of circumstances. So is there any timeline with the Wi-Fi being repaired so that it works as it's intended to work?
We have heard nothing about a timeline.
In addition to this Wi-Fi printer issue, what else is of concern on the radar? Because I do speak with the chapter here at Memorial University in St. John's, but some Grenfell-specific concerns beyond Wi-Fi and the printer.
Well, we would just like for everything to go back to how it was, because I think, like I said in our initial interview, students have had to increase their data plans. They've had to, deal with this uncomfortable situation. That's why a bunch of us live on campus, because we have all these resources available to us. But then now it's causing that disruption, or it's making the environment uncomfortable because of the disruption that the network and Wi-Fi issue has caused.
How big a concern is housing in Corner Brook for your students?
It was an issue at the beginning of or at the end of last year, but the university had a plan to do community housing, like people would open up their homes to students, and I think they were able to accommodate the extra students that they, gave admission to where housing couldn't accommodate them.
Haditza, I appreciate making time for the program. Would you like to say anything else before we say goodbye?
Well, I just want everyone to, please show support for us over here at the Grenfell campus. That refund would really be a strong way for the university to at least show that they acknowledge what students are going through here, because we are still going through it. We know that they put in hotspots, but like you said initially, it's been kicking people off, and others have had to use their Wi-Fi continuously because the hotspot just isn't working for them. And, people have presentations. There's people, doing theses and stuff and writing essays. It's just causing a lot of disruption.
It sounds like it. I appreciate making time for the show. You're always welcome.
Thank you.
Take care. You too. Bye-bye. Haditza Bello, she's the president of the Campus Student Union at Grenfell. Let's keep rolling. Let's go to line number 4. Adam, you're on the air.
Hey, buddy. How's it going?
Doing well. How about you?
Not too bad. So I didn't really realize that this happened yesterday until I heard you mention it this morning, but the House of Assembly is closed?
Yep. It's adjourned until Wednesday, budget day.
Wednesday
next week, yep.
Okay. So I guess they feel that a week and a half sitting in the House of Assembly is enough to come up with solutions for all of the issues that we're currently facing in the province?
Apparently so. They say the session was concluded quicker than anticipated, so they sat for 7 days. As Tony Wakeham pointed out, there's 13 pieces of legislation on the agenda, on the order paper, and none of them were tabled this go around. I have no idea why. There's a couple that have been sitting there for a while, but with the issues, and I threw Crown Lands out there myself, whether it be the Information Act, whether it be the issues regarding Crown Lands, whether it be about looking for an overhaul of the City of St. John's Act, then none of it really happened. It's one thing to have some of the debates we've had, and fair enough, but the problems were piling up and the questions were really quite pointed and in some form possibly aggressive, but that's nature of the beast. People are stressed out.
Yeah, well, especially some of these long-standing issues like the fishery. We have the same issues in the fishery year after year and nothing ever really gets solved. And this Crown Lands issue, they've done, 3 public consultations over the last 10 years, and nothing has changed with that at all. So, it's all of these issues that are just lingering in the air that have not been properly addressed by our government, and people are just fed up with it. So that's why all these questions are being pointed directly at the people who are responsible for them, because they haven't done anything to actually fix them.
I wonder...
the Crown Land thing... Sorry, go ahead.
I'm just going to say, sometimes I wonder... whether we take complicated issues like the fishery, and it is complicated, and whether we talk about Crown Lands, at some point you have to ask the question, not only why we aren't making any moves on an obvious problem, is whether or not there's a distinct understanding of the problem. Because unless you understand it, you can't really fix it. So I just wonder sometimes if that's the hurdle that we're trying to clear in the House of Assembly, is enough people, and inside the senior bureaucracy we absolutely should, but at the political level, there is questions that I think to be asked about, do they really understand the extent of the problem? And if not, why not?
But see, the thing, my opinion of all of that is that I don't expect our elected ministers to understand all of the problems in their portfolio, because you can have a minister who's responsible for education today, and then they can do a little shuffle, and then tomorrow they're responsible for transportation. So I don't expect anybody to be an expert in all of these different fields and just automatically know everything about the portfolio that they're handed on any given day. My issue is that there seems to be a complete refusal to talk to the people who might give them some clarity on the issues that they are now responsible for. I've been trying to talk to people in government about this Crown Land issue for years, and nobody will talk to me. I've gotten to speak to some other bureaucrats in government, but everyone that I've spoken to about the Crown Lands issue, I don't know if they actually believe the things that they're saying or if they're just doubling down on what they are enforcing based on the legislation. But everybody, I've had, at least 5 different people just try to justify their actions with this Crown Lands thing. I've had at least 5 different people say to me that they're not doing anything wrong because the people who are ending up in court and losing their claim of land ownership never owned the land to begin with. So, there's people, like I've said before, my hometown, there's been people living there for about 275 years, and our current modern-day government has existed for 75 years. So 200 years before there was a government here, people have lived there and owned land there and raised generations of family there. And then a government comes along 200 years later, and on day one, know that people have lived here for 200 to 500 years, and they knew that there was no reliable database of who owned what land. That was a known issue on day one, and nobody up to and including today has taken any meaningful action to try to rectify that problem. And they're just now slowly cycling through one family at a time, ending up in court and losing their shirt and losing their land ownership. And they've got no problem with it. Everyone that I've talked to, everyone that I've been able to talk to, because most people just ignore me on this, but everyone who is actually willing to talk to me just justify it as if they didn't own the land to begin with, so it's not theirs to sell, which is ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, by the time you pay your lawyer, go through the amount of time it takes and the frustration attached to it, and for instance, we keep saying the diamonds of Catalina, but then the eventual $10,000. They had to pay for a piece of land that they were sure after 4 decades of living on it was theirs.
Yeah, and I mean, the issue, I don't understand how they made this change to the legislation in 76, came into effect on January 1st, 1977, and I don't understand how they thought that it was a good idea to make that retroactive for 20 years. I mean, if they said from now on, January 1st, 1977, these are the requirements that everyone in the province must follow in order to have a valid claim of ownership of a piece of property. But the way that they made it retroactive for 20 years, I mean, they essentially immediately nullified anybody's property ownership who has bought their property within the last 19 years. If you didn't own and occupy the property for that 20-year period that they laid out, then you don't have an adequate claim of that ownership to it. So if you bought your land in 1958 and then in 1977 they changed this Lands Act, then you don't own your land anymore, which is the case with the Abbotts here, who we bought the land from. They bought their land in 1971, which was, at the time, they did nothing wrong. They did everything. They did more than what most people did back in that day. I mean, they had deeds and everything done up properly by lawyers at the time. So then in 77, the Lands Act changed. So 6 years later, the Lands Act changes and nullifies the property purchase that they made 6 years prior. So in 1971, everything perfectly fine. 1977, they changed the Lands Act, and now that land that you bought 6 years ago is not yours anymore. It's ridiculous.
It is. And I shouldn't be giggling at that, but it is ridiculous. You're right.
It is. It's laughable. It's understandable for you to laugh. And, I mean, back in October or November, there was another case that went before the court. It's legal jargon, which doesn't, it's hard for anybody who's not a lawyer or a judge to understand it, but they went in arguing a case about the color of title, basically saying this is what we did. We purchased the land and we, in good faith, purchased it, believing that we did everything right at the time. So, the Lands Act changing has caused this issue for us, which is of no fault of our own. And the judge, again, only able to adjudicate the case based on the legislation that's written down on paper, it didn't apply. So they had their case based on color of title dismissed as well. So they were in the same boat as the Diamonds or the Abbotts or anybody else. So it's like the Lands Act is the governing document of who owns what land in this province, and it's currently written heavily in favor of the Crown. And from all the conversations that I've had, I mean, I can see where this is going. Unless you have a piece of land clear-cut with a house on it, or clear-cut with a business on it, or clear-cut with a farm on it, then you have absolutely no chance. The piece of property here was 2.2 acres. They had roughly half, so say 1.1 acre cleared with a house and a detached garage built on it. The other 1.1 acre, which, as far as they're concerned, it's all one parcel of land. It's 2.2 acres of their residential property. The other 1.1 acre, the Crown considers it to be a separate parcel of land. So there's two parcels of 1.1 acres of land here. The other parcel was not used under the Crown's very specific definition of what constitutes use. Now, they used it for residential purposes, for recreation and privacy, and, they had some walking trails cut through it to the neighbor's house and stuff like that. So they used it for exactly what they wanted to use it for under residential uses, but because it hasn't been clear cut, and for whatever reason they would want to build a second house on their property, then that was the sticking point that saw the Crown take their land away from them. And there's plenty of properties around Newfoundland that have 2, 4, 5 acres of land or more they don't have it all clear-cut because there's no point of that. They're using it for privacy and recreation and leisure. They have a small portion of it clear-cut where they built their house, and then the rest of it is a natural green space that they enjoy on residential use. But the Crown is going to look at those pieces of property and say, okay, you have your house, we'll give you this acre because you require an acre for your house and your septic field, and the other 4 acres, you haven't used it, so it's ours. And that's what's going to continue to happen, and it's going to happen more and more.
Adam, because of the time on the clock, we'll have to leave it there, but I appreciate your time this morning.
Okay, thanks, Matty.
Thanks, Adam. Bye-bye. All right, final break of the morning. Don't go away. And welcome back to the program. Let's go to the line number 2. Chess, you're on the air.
Good morning, Paddy. How are you?
Doing okay. Chess, how you doing?
Not bad, not bad. Paddy, I got a question for you about this taxes that's coming down on the poor people. That global one, is it?
The what? I'm sorry? What are we talking?
Taxes, that 23 or 25%.
Oh, the carbon tax increase on April 1st, yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's going to do a job on Newfoundlanders here. I think myself because I'm here now, like I'm on a fixed income. Do you know what I'm just before Christmas I was paying $1,000 for rent for me and my son to live into a house, nowhere else to go. Now it's gone up to $1,300. Now the other $300 is coming out of my food money. What am I going to do when he starts bringing this down? And that's not counting my eating light. So your eating light is going to go up, right? Your heat is going to go up more, and it's going to cost the food allowance. Food is going to go up because the truckers want more money for their gas.
Yeah, the increase.
Kill people here in Newfoundland. This government don't care about anybody anymore. I think that fellow Pierre Piano, what his name is, he should be here trying to run this government, not the premiers in there, because I think he'd do better. Half a minute might wake up and smell the coffee, then, right?
Well,
and the roses.
Mr. Polyev he's a member of Parliament.
People on the street nowhere to go, and that's it. They don't care about it anymore. Like poor people, right?
Well, I don't know about the level of care, but of course, Mr. Polyev is a federal politician. He's a member of Parliament. He's the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. He's not in the running to be the
But he should be here running, though. I wish he was here running, because I think the government might tell a different story if he was here. Because I don't think he's afraid what ones are here. Because it's unbelievable what they're doing with the poor person. So that extra 23 or 25% that's coming out of my check. I just have about $100 now every 2 weeks to pay for my food, and until I pay my bills and my rent, and like that. I just have $100. What can you get out of $100 into a grocery store today for 2 people? Nothing. And they're going to cost more crime when they bring this down, because people are not going to keep themselves starving. I can assure you that. They're driving innocent people out, seniors and other people, don't do nothing, like out shoplifting and everything yet. You just watch. Everything is going to go chaos when he comes here. They got up for it.
Okay.
It should be loud in Newfoundland at all. It should be bombarded from Newfoundland. Justin Trudeau.
Okay.
I don't care who likes it or he lumps it or no, but still no. Listen, I got another question for you.
Quick one.
I don't want to say it on the line. Will you be able to give me a call? It's very important I could speak to you.
It won't be today.
No, about a matter. You take my phone number, I'll be here, and I got something I want very expected for you to deal with, just to see what you're going to say to me about this stuff. I'm not going to be saucy and being rude. I wouldn't do that to you, right? Because I love you and the Openline. There's nothing being done here only for you. In Newfoundland, people talking about the government and everything else. And by the way, I see your daughter on the news all the time. Tell her to keep up the good work.
Yeah, no, she's not related to me, but she does a very good job. I agree with you on that front.
Oh, yeah, she's one of the best. I say she's going to be a good news reporter.
Let's hope so. Good for her. I met her not that long ago. Chess, we're out of time this morning, but you take good care of yourself.
Yeah, but can you give me a call when you're ready later on?
Yeah, it won't be today. I've really got a full day.
Yeah, but you got my number there, right?
Dave has it, yeah.
Yeah, and you'll give me a call. It's very important. I don't want to speak it on the air.
Okay.
I want to see what you think of it.
I got to run, Chess. I appreciate the time.
Okay. Yeah, bye.
Okay, right, bye-bye. All right, good show today. Big thanks to all hands who support the program, and we will indeed pick up this conversation again tomorrow morning right here on VOCM and Big Land FM's Open Line. On behalf of the producer, David Williams, I'm your host, Paddy Daly. Have yourself a safe, fun, happy day. We'll talk in the morning. Bye-bye.